Hi, my name is Luna, and if you've ever felt like the background character in your own family's highlight reel, welcome. Pull up a chair. I saved you a seat because God knows I spent most of my life hoping someone would do the same for me. I'm a single mom, a full-time hustler, and a part-time dreamer. I take freelance gigs when I can get them photo shoots for local businesses, editing wedding reels, sometimes even designing flyers for barbershops and realtors who still believe in paper advertising. On weekends, I do delivery runs for extra cash. On weekdays, I pretend I have it together for my daughter, Avery, who still thinks the world is big and kind and built just for her. We live in a third-floor walk-up in Norfolk, Virginia. No elevator, no dishwasher, and the kind of air conditioning unit that groans louder than a grandpa with bad knees. But we make it work. We always do. So when an email popped into my inbox last Thursday, subject line Reynolds Family Summer Gathering, Brookhaven Estate, I didn't even blink. I was ready to delete it with the rest of the spam and rejections, but something about it made me pause. Maybe it was the address. Maybe it was the timing. Or maybe it was just that quiet ache that shows up when you least expect it and whispers. Check. Just check. I clicked it open, and there it was. My name, Luna Fields plus Uno. It felt like a glitch in the Matrix. I hadn't been invited to anything Reynolds in over a decade, not since I got pregnant at 19 and decided I wasn't going to marry just to make it look better in Christmas cards. I was scrubbed from the family group chat like a typo. No calls. No birthdays. No invitations. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Madison probably used the guest list from her wedding years ago and forgot to delete me. Still, I stared at it like it was a secret note someone had dropped and wasn't supposed to. And then my phone rang. Mom? I almost didn't answer. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. Luna, she said, like she'd just stubbed her toe. I got the invite. I said, skipping the small talk. There was a pause on the line. Then a tight little chuckle. Oh, that. Madison must have just sent it to everyone. You know how she gets when she's organizing? Should I come? I asked. I don't even know why I asked. Maybe I wanted her to say yes. Maybe I wanted her to say, I miss you. Instead, she offered this gem. If you do, just try to wear something nice. Okay, Grandma Evelyn's standards haven't dropped. I bit down on every emotion clawing its way up my throat. Right. I said, something nice. She hung up without another word. No, how's Avery? No, we'd love to see you. Just fashion advice. Like this was a runway and not my life. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the laptop screen like it had insulted me. I should have just deleted the invite. But then Avery came skipping in. Face sticky with juice. Curls bouncing like springs. Mommy, she chirped. What's a gathering? Is it like a party, sort of? I said, a family party. Her whole face lit up. Are we going? I can wear the yellow dress with the sparkly belt. And right there, in the middle of our cluttered living room, with bills stacked under my elbow and a fan whining in the window, I lied. Maybe. Because I couldn't say no to that hope. I couldn't crush that joy, not after all the times I'd already had to say not this year or maybe next time. Avery was just a kid. She didn't need to know that her mom had been boxed out of her own family like expired food. That night, after she went to bed, hugging a worn-out teddy bear she named Mr. Pickles, I stood in front of my closet. I pushed past winter coats and clothes that didn't fit anymore until I found it, the pale blue dress Madison had handed me years ago, like it was a hand-me-down for charity. You'll probably get more use out of this than I will, she'd said. With a smile sharp enough to cut glass, it still fit barely. But it would do. Not to impress. Not to win anyone over, and definitely not because I believed I was truly invited. No. I was going because sometimes just showing up is an act of quiet defiance. A declaration that you exist. Even when people try to write you out, I wasn't going to belong. But I was going to be seen. And this time, I wouldn't be walking in with my head down. I'd be walking in for me. For Avery. For every woman who's ever been told she wasn't good enough, polite enough, married enough, rich enough, or just enough. Because maybe I wasn't on the original list. But I was going anyway. And if you've ever felt like the background character in your own family's highlight reel, welcome. Pull up a chair. I saved you a seat because God knows I spent most of my life hoping someone would do the same for me. I'm a single mom, a full-time hustler, and a part-time dreamer. I take freelance gigs when I can get them, photo shoots for local businesses, editing, wedding reels. Sometimes even designing flyers for barbershops and realtors who still believe in paper advertising. On weekends, I do delivery runs for extra cash. On weekdays, I pretend I have it together for my daughter, Avery, who still thinks the world is big and kind and built just for her. We live in a third-floor walk-up in Norfolk, Virginia. No elevator. No dishwasher. And the kind of air conditioning unit that groans louder than a grandpa with bad knees. The hallway smells like stale coffee and mothballs. And the neighbors fight loud enough that Avery thinks drama is just part of adult conversation. But we make it work. We always do. So when an email popped into my inbox last Thursday, subject line, Reynolds Family Summer Gathering, Brookhaven Estate, I didn't even blink. I was ready to delete it with the rest of the spam and rejections. But something about it made me pause. Maybe it was the address. Maybe it was the timing. Or maybe it was just that quiet ache that shows up when you least expect it and whispers, check. Just check. I clicked it open. And there it was. My name. Luna Fields plus uno. It felt like a glitch in the Matrix. I hadn't been invited to anything Reynolds in over a decade, not since I got pregnant at 19 and decided I wasn't going to marry just to make it look better in Christmas cards. I was scrubbed from the family group chat like a typo. No calls. No birthdays. No invitations. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Madison, my cousin, probably used the guest list from her wedding years ago and forgot to delete me. Still, I stared at it like it was a secret note someone had dropped and wasn't supposed to. And then my phone rang. Mom. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. Luna, she said, like she'd just stubbed her toe. I got the invite. I said, skipping the small talk. There was a pause on the line. Then a tight little chuckle. Oh, that. Madison must have just sent it to everyone. You know how she gets when she's organizing. Should I come, I asked. I don't even know why, I asked. Maybe I wanted her to say yes. Maybe I wanted her to say I miss you. Instead, she offered this gem. If you do, just try to wear something nice. Okay, Grandma Evelyn's standards haven't dropped. I bit down on every emotion clawing its way up my throat. Right. I said, something nice. She hung up without another word. No, how's Avery no? It'd be nice to see you. Just a passive-aggressive fashion tip. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the laptop screen like it had insulted me. I should have just deleted the invite. I should have made popcorn. Put on a reality show. and let the moment pass like all the others. But then Avery came skipping in. Face sticky with juice. Curls bouncing like springs. "Mommy," she chirped. "What's a gathering? Is it like a party, sort of?" I said, "A family party." Her whole face lit up. "Are we going? I can wear the yellow dress with the sparkly belt, and right there?" In the middle of our cluttered living room, with bills stacked under my elbow and a fan whining in the window, I lied. Maybe. Because I couldn't say no to that hope. I couldn't crush that joy, not after all the times I'd already had to say not this year or maybe next time. Avery was just a kid. She didn't need to know that her mom had been boxed out of her own family, like expired food. That night, after she went to bed hugging a worn-out teddy bear she named Mr. Pickles, I stood in front of my closet. I pushed past winter coats and clothes that didn't fit anymore until I found it the pale blue dress Madison had handed me years ago, like it was a hand-me-down for charity. "You'll probably get more use out of this than I will," she'd said, with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. It still fit barely, but it would do. Not to impress. Not to win anyone over, and definitely not because I believed I was truly invited. No. I was going because sometimes just showing up is an act of quiet defiance. A declaration that you exist, even when people try to write you out. I wasn't going to belong, but I was going to be seen, and this time, I wouldn't be walking in with my head down. I'd be walking in for me. For Avery. For every woman who's ever been told she wasn't good enough, polite enough, married enough, rich enough, or just enough because maybe I wasn't on the original list. But I was going anyway. The sun over Brookhaven was the kind that looked golden in Instagram photos but felt like a slow roast in real life. The driveway leading up to the Reynolds estate was lined with glossy SUVs and imported sedans, each one polished to the point of vanity. Avery's face was practically pressed against the car window as we crept past them, whispering, "Mom, this place looks like a movie." She wasn't wrong. The Reynolds estate wasn't just a home, it was curated. Manicured hedges, a white columned entrance, stone lions by the fountain, and hanging ferns that probably had better skincare routines than I did. I parked 2 blocks down the street. Not because there was no space, but because I didn't want anyone recognizing the dings in my 10-year-old Honda or the duct-taped side mirror. We walked the rest of the way in silence. Avery skipped ahead, her yellow dress fluttering like a sunflower in motion. My heels clicked softly on the stone path, sinking slightly into the gravel. I tried to adjust my dress without making it obvious that it clung in all the wrong places. It was hot. The kind of heat that sticks to your skin and makes you feel seen in the worst ways. As we reached the backyard, the party revealed itself like a slow camera pan in a Hallmark film. The air smelled like citrus and Wealth champagne fizz, fresh-cut hydrangeas, and just the right amount of sunscreen. A quartet played a string version of a pop song I almost recognized. People floated around like they had nowhere urgent to be. Women wore wrinkle-free linen in shades of cream and sand. Men sported pastel polos with boat shoes and smiles that said, "We summer in Nantucket." Avery tugged my hand. "Mom, they have watermelon cubes. On sticks." She took off before I could answer, her curls bouncing with joy. I stood there alone, just off the main path, gripping my purse like it had security clearance. No one turned to greet me. No nods. No smiles. Not even that awkward half-wave people give when they think they might know you but don't care enough to find out. And then Madison appeared. She glided out from the French doors like a debutante, wearing white, even though it was clearly a catered outdoor event. Her hair was in a soft updo, and she held a wine glass like it was part of her anatomy. When her eyes landed on me, they narrowed just slightly, but her lips pulled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyebrows. "Oh wow," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. "That dress still fits. Impressive." I smiled with all the warmth of a freezer door. "Thanks. Yours looks expensive." She laughed lightly. "We weren't sure you'd come. But Avery must be thrilled. It's good for her to see how we celebrate family." You know, I nodded once. Carefully. There it was, the signature Reynolds-style burn, subtle, polite, and soaked in superiority. The kind that leaves no bruise but still stings. Someone called her name from the patio, and she waved without looking. "You're seated near the ivy wall under the oak. I thought you might like the shade." Translation: stay where you can't be seen. I found the chair she meant, a lonely white folding chair set apart from the circle of conversation. No name card. No cushion. Just metal and sunlight and distance. I sat, trying not to sweat through the silk dress I had ironed twice this morning. I crossed my legs and uncrossed them, picked at the edge of my clutch. My eyes scanned the crowd, catching flickers of recognition that didn't last long enough to form a greeting. Uncle Harold was refilling his drink. Aunt Beth was handing out monogrammed napkins and compliments. No one looked in my direction. Avery stood by the lemonade station with two girls her age, giggling, pointing at butterflies. Her happiness was pure, untouched by seating charts and subtext. I looked toward the pergola, where a seating list was clipped to a gold easel. Beautiful calligraphy spelled out names in delicate ink. Couples, front row. Immediate family, center. Special guests, terrace. No Luna Fields. No mention at all. I wasn't just seated away from the crowd. I had been deliberately excluded from the layout of the day, literally and symbolically. It wasn't even subtle. It was strategy. And yet, I didn't leave. I didn't crumble. Because I'd seen this play before, I knew the cues. The costume changes. The polite venom disguised as elegance. I'd lived it. And I had something they didn't, a daughter who saw me as everything they tried to erase. So I sat in my no-name chair, in the corner of their curated world, and I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I was ready. I didn't need their welcome anymore. I was already here. I was sipping lukewarm water from a flimsy plastic cup, one of those that collapses if you grip it too tight, when I noticed Avery was no longer by the lemonade stand. She had been there just moments ago, laughing with two girls in matching pink sundresses, their curls bouncing as they leaned in conspiratorially. But now, she was gone. A quiet ripple of panic stirred in my chest. I stood up, nearly knocking my chair over, and scanned the crowd, the charcuterie table, the flower archway, the patio empty of her tiny yellow dress. Then I saw her, far across the lawn, under a lace-draped pergola framed with twinkling white lights. A small group of kids was being shepherded by a woman who looked like she ran a luxury vineyard in Napa. Tan skin, sharp sunglasses, high ponytail, clipboard in hand. Avery was among them, trailing slightly behind. I took a step forward, but before I could move any further, a familiar voice stopped me. "Luna, don't worry." It was Brian Madison's husband, still in salmon-colored shorts and holding a cocktail that had a sprig of rosemary too tall to be practical. "They're heading to the young guest program," he said with a casual wave. "It's this cute little setup Maddie arranged. Games, crafts, bubbles, face paint. You know, curated fun. I didn't know there was a program." I said, voice tight. Oh, he raised an eyebrow. She included it in the invite. Maybe it went to your promotions tab, or spam. He smiled, like he was telling me the weather. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. A gentle nudge back to my seat. A silent, polite wall. She's totally fine. He added. Looks like she's having a blast. I offered a nod that I didn't mean and stepped back. Away from the gravel path. I didn't sit. I stayed just out of frame. Far enough to avoid disrupting the curated aesthetic, but close enough to see. The kids were arranged in a circle on picnic blankets patterned in soft florals. Each had a small canvas, some paintbrushes, and glitter, lots of glitter. Avery was handed a seashell and a mini paint palette by a teen volunteer who looked like she had just stepped out of a catalog. She accepted them with a quiet and polite smile. Her smile. The one I knew didn't come from joy but from calculation. She sat cross-legged, brush in hand, surrounded by girls with names like Scarlet, Sloane, and Harper. Their voices rose in a flurry of casual wealth. Our house in the Hamptons. Miponis trainer. We're going to Portugal next week. Avery listened, nodded, and laughed at the right moments, but her eyes scanned the group like someone trying to decode a new language. Then one of the girls leaned over. A little blonde with a white bow and the air of someone who had never waited in line for anything. So, she whispered loud enough for me to hear. What does your mom do? Time slowed. Avery blinked. Her hand froze mid-paint stroke. She looked toward the patio. Toward me, though she didn't know I was watching. My heart sank. She hesitated, then mumbled something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw it in her body, the way her shoulders tensed, how her hands fidgeted with the paintbrush. The other girl tilted her head. Oh, that's nice, she said, and turned back to her seashell. But I knew that tone, the same one I'd heard for years in office lobbies, at school pickup lines, at family parties like this one. Polite dismissal. Masked judgment. Avery looked down at her canvas. She started painting again, but slower. Less sparkle. Less laughter. And that was when it hit me. Not the look. Not the comment. But the change. The shift in my daughter. The quiet way she folded in on herself. How she dimmed her light just a little. Made herself a bit smaller. To fit a world that didn't know how to make room for us. My eyes blurred. Not with sadness alone, but with rage. Helpless. Useless rage. The kind that clutches your throat and makes you want to scream, but you know no one would hear you. Not really. Because no one here saw it. To them. It was just a casual question from a curious child. A game. But to Avery and to me it was a test. One she had to pass to stay in the circle. I had spent years carrying the weight of judgment. I knew how to shoulder it. But seeing it handed to my daughter like some inherited burden, it broke something in me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. No makeup left anyway. Just the heat of the sun and the sting of truth. I wanted to rush in. Grab her hand. Say, you don't owe anyone an explanation. Your mother may not be perfect. But she's strong. She's real. But I didn't. Because I knew I couldn't protect her forever. This was her world too now. And, like me, she would have to find her own way to stand tall in places designed to make her feel small. And God help them all when she finally does. I didn't sleep that night. Even after we'd left the party. Even after Avery curled up beside me in her favorite unicorn pajamas and drifted off with the quiet sigh of someone too young to carry the weight of the world, my eyes stayed open. The events of the day played on loop. The lawn. The whispered question. The way my daughter hesitated. The way she tucked her pride into her pocket like something fragile and embarrassing. And the way I just watched. The next morning, I packed up our things earlier than planned. The bed and breakfast smelled like lemon-scented soap and disappointment. I couldn't stand to sit through another brunch, surrounded by stories of new investment properties and weekend sailing trips. As I drove, Avery sat quietly in the back seat, kicking her sneakers together. Not sad. Not angry. Just distant. Halfway home. I pulled off at a quiet overlook. It was one of those places people post photos from high cliffs, tall pines, and the ocean stretching endlessly, like a promise you're scared to believe in. We sat on a wooden bench, the breeze lifting strands of Avery's curls. She broke the silence first. "Mom," she said softly, "why didn't you come talk to me yesterday, when the kids asked about you?" I swallowed hard. "I saw you," I admitted. "I was standing near the patio. I heard what she asked." She looked at me, eyes wide. "You did," I nodded. "And I watched how you answered. So carefully. So small." Avery blinked quickly. "I didn't want them to laugh. Or think I was weird." "Because your mom isn't like their moms?" I asked gently. She bit her lip, nodding slowly. And I could have told her 1,000 things in that moment. About how proud I was of her. About how her mom had fought tooth and nail just to put gas in the car and shoes on her feet. About how I'd worked 3 jobs. Skipped meals. And cried in bathroom stalls so she wouldn't have to see me break. But I didn't. Because she didn't need a speech. She needed the truth. "Avery," I said, turning to face her fully. "It's not your job to fit into their world. It's their job to make space for you. For all of you. Your laugh? Your questions. Give your dreams. And yes, even your weird, magical, messy mom who once burnt spaghetti and cried during a cereal commercial." She giggled, wiping her eyes. "I want you to promise me something." I continued. "Never, ever make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger." "You hear me," she nodded. More certain this time. "I love who you are," I said. "And I love that you come from me. We may not have yachts or pastel clothes or perfectly curated Instagram lives, but we have heart. We have strength. And we have stories they'll never understand." We sat there a while longer, just watching the water. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not in her. In me. Because for the longest time, I thought I had to get back into those rooms. That if I could just prove I was good enough, cleaned up enough, successful enough, then maybe the world would stop looking at me like a stain on the carpet. But I was done knocking on closed doors. I didn't need their tables anymore. I would build my own. I turned to Avery with a fire in my chest I hadn't felt in years. "You know what I said? Let's start something." Her eyebrows lifted. "Like what a project?" "A story. Something real. About people like us. About moms who work hard and show up. Even when they're tired and messy and afraid." "Like a book?" she asked. "Maybe. Or a podcast. Or a blog. Or a community center. I don't know yet. But something." She grinned. "Can I help?" "Absolutely." And just like that, the weight started to lift. Because the world may never stop trying to tell us who we're supposed to be. But we get to decide what we do with that voice. We can shrink. Or we can speak. And I was done shrinking. The day I quit my job, there wasn't some dramatic storm or slamming of doors. No raised voices or tearful goodbyes. Just me. standing in the break room of a cafe that smelled like burnt toast and broken dreams, quietly folding up my apron. I had been working there for nearly 2 years. It paid the bills. Barely. But every shift felt like a reminder of the version of myself I had let go of. The version that once believed in more. So that morning, I walked out. Not because I had a grand plan, but because I finally realized staying meant continuing to shrink. Avery was at school. The apartment was quiet. I sat on our secondhand couch, stared at the ceiling, and asked the one question I had avoided for too long: what do I have that's worth sharing? My eyes landed on a vintage denim jacket hanging by the door. I had picked it up at a thrift store for $3. There was something about the way the fabric was worn around the elbows and the faded stitching that told a story. It wasn't just a jacket, it was someone's past, wrapped in denim and dust. That's when it hit me. I didn't have to start big. I didn't need investors or a 10-step plan. I had stories. And stories were everything. That afternoon, I took a few photos of the jacket, laid it flat on a quilt, added soft lighting from the window, and wrote a short caption. This jacket has been places. It's seen rainy day walks, gas station coffees, maybe even a first kiss behind a high school gym. It deserves a new chapter. I listed it online. Nothing happened for 2 days. Then I got a notification. One order, then another. Not just for the jacket, but for 2 scarves I had listed with similar little stories. Turns out, people weren't just buying clothes. They were buying connection. Each item I posted came with a piece of narrative, some imagined, some real. I poured heart into each one. Not just describing fabric or size, but imagining the life that had touched it before. This lace blouse reminds me of my mother's Sunday best, worn with nervous hands and too much perfume. These boots, they've danced. Maybe enjoy? Maybe to forget. And slowly, something incredible began to unfold. Women started messaging me. Not just to buy, but to talk. To say thank you. To say. This reminded me of a version of myself I lost. One woman wrote, "I've been divorced 2 years. Haven't worn lipstick since, but your red velvet clutch made me want to put some on again." Another said, "Your stories help me believe in second chances." That phrase stuck with me. Second chances. Because that's what I was living. So I gave my little online shop a name, Second Chances with Luna. But it didn't stop there. With every post, I wrote a bit more. Shared bits of my life. Memories. Leçons. Questions I didn't have answers to. I started a blog. At first, I thought no one would read it. But slowly, the views ticked up. The comments came. Not trolls or critics, but women like me. Mothers. Dreamers. Survivors. The ones rebuilding piece by piece. They told me their stories. Some made me laugh. Some made me cry in the kitchen with my laptop open and pasta boiling over on the stove. This community, this unexpected circle of strangers, became something sacred. It wasn't about sales anymore. It was about healing. We were passing each other metaphoric jackets, stitched with second chances and messy hope. One night, Avery came into my room while I was packaging orders. She looked at the thank you notes I always included, little handwritten lines like, "You are not broken," or "This is just the beginning." She picked one up, read it, then looked at me. "Do you really believe all that she asked?" I smiled. "I do now." And I meant it. Because something in me had shifted. I no longer walked with my head down in grocery store aisles. I was worried about running into someone from my old life. I was building a new one. And every box I shipped, every story I told, every tear-filled message I received was proof. I had been seen, Not for my failures, but for my light. And best of all, I had given Avery a front row seat to the resurrection of her mother. Orders kept coming in. Sometimes just one a day. Sometimes 5 or 6. Each time the little notification popped up on my phone, I felt something unfamiliar bloom inside me confidence. It had been years since I associated my name with something positive. Something that felt like progress. I started waking up early. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make coffee, open my journal, and plan out stories for the new items I'd photograph that day. My apartment turned into a mini studio, scarves draped over chairs, jackets hung on windows, a pile of belts on the kitchen table. One afternoon, I received a message from a woman named Carol, a mother of 3 in Michigan. She told me she'd been laid off, was starting over, and my words were the only thing keeping her hopeful. She said, "Luna, you don't just sell clothes. You sow courage back into people." That line, it stayed with me. I wrote it down and taped it above my desk. Soon after, I added a section to the blog called Letters to Luna. It was a space where women could send their own stories anonymously or signed. I started reading them aloud on weekly videos. No makeup. No filters. Just me. A warm light. And truth. Pure. Unpolished truth. The first video got 30 views. Then 300. Then 5,000. What started as selling secondhand items turned into something more powerful, a movement of reclamation. I wasn't trying to inspire anyone. I was just telling the truth. And sometimes, the truth is, all people need to remember their own strength. Even now, as I sit here writing this, the laundry's half done. Avery is finishing her homework. And there's a chipped mug of tea next to me. Life isn't suddenly glamorous. We're not rich. We still eat boxed mac and cheese once a week. But every day, I choose something I never used to. I choose to believe in the woman I'm becoming. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by packages and empty rolls of tape, trying to coax the printer into working for the 3rd time that week. The subject line simply read, "Your story matters." For a second, I thought it was spam. But when I clicked, my breath caught in my throat. It was from Jennifer West, a writer for Hope and Heroines, a well-respected digital magazine that spotlighted stories of resilience and recovery among women. She had come across one of my blog entries, The Red Scarf and the Letter I Never Sent, and said she hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. She wanted to share it with their readers. My heart pounded so loud I barely heard Avery asking for a snack. That night, after Avery went to bed, I read Jennifer's message a dozen times. I debated whether to respond. I worried, was I ready to let the world see me this way? Not just the curated thrifted jackets and poetic captions, but me unfiltered, unpolished, painfully real. But then I remembered what I always wrote to my readers: vulnerability is power. So I replied. A week later, the article went live. It was titled How a Single Mother in Oregon Turned Vintage Threads into Healing Stories. I thought maybe a few people would read it. Maybe comment. Instead, it exploded. Within days, my inbox was flooded. Not with trolls or critics, but with women. Hundreds of them, telling me they felt seen, that my journey echoed their own in quiet, invisible ways. A nurse from Atlanta who had battled addiction, a widow in Arizona raising her grandson, a college dropout trying to find her way again. One message simply said, "I thought I was the only one. Thank you." Then came the podcast invite. Rise from the Ashes was one of the most listened to shows for women looking for hope. Hosted by Sandra Ray, who had her own story of rebuilding after bankruptcy and divorce, it reached over 1 million subscribers. When they asked if I'd be a guest, my first instinct was to say no. The idea of sitting in front of a microphone, telling my story to strangers, terrified me. What if I stammered? What if I cried? What if my voice cracked and I sounded weak, but Avery overheard me talking myself out of it? She walked in, crossed her arms, and said, "You always tell people to be brave. Are you going to be brave now?" 2. That settled it. The recording took place over Zoom. I wore my favorite thrifted cardigan and had a cup of chamomile tea by my side. Sandra's voice was warm and calm, like an old friend calling you after years apart. She asked about everything, how it started, how it nearly ended, and what lit the match again. And I told her, not in a polished way, not perfectly, but truthfully, about the tears on the bathroom floor, the night I almost pawned Avery's bike, the guilt, the fear, the morning I chose to believe in second chances. When the episode aired a week later, I braced myself. But the world didn't mock me. It embraced me. The episode was downloaded over 300 blanks 400 ashen. 0 times in the first week. My blog traffic surged. Orders increased. More importantly, the letters came again, but this time, even deeper. Women began saying, "I started writing again because of you. I applied for a job today. I forgave myself." Then came another message from the editorial team at Hope and Heroines. They wanted me to write a monthly column, Second Chances with Luna. Me, a columnist. I laughed so hard when I read the offer. I spilled coffee on my shirt. I didn't even mind. It was surreal. Each month, I'd get to write about the messy, beautiful truth of starting over. And I wasn't doing it from some mountaintop of success. I was still in the trenches, still figuring it out. That's what made it real. One night, I got a message I didn't expect. It was from Lisa. We hadn't spoken in years, not since she'd cut me off during my lowest point. Her message was short, but it carried weight. "I read your article. I'm sorry I wasn't there. You deserved better. I'm proud of you." I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. I didn't respond with bitterness. I responded with grace. "Thank you. I hope you're well." Truly. Because here's the truth. No one tells you healing isn't just about rising. It's about letting go of what kept you buried. And sometimes, all it takes is one person daring to speak their truth, for 1,000 others to find the courage to stand up and whisper theirs. That weekend, Avery and I went for a walk through the local park. The leaves were turning gold and auburn, and she skipped ahead, crunching through piles of them like she was 10 years younger. I watched her, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, lightness. She turned around suddenly and asked, "Are you famous now?" I laughed. "No, not famous. Just heard?" She shrugged. "Same thing." That night, after she went to bed, I sat on the balcony with a notebook in my lap. The city buzzed softly in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine. I thought about everything that had happened, how quickly the world can shift when you tell the truth out loud. One message stood out to me more than the others. It was from a 62-year-old woman in Wisconsin named Marla. She wrote, "I raised 4 kids. I buried one. I haven't felt anything for years. Then I heard your voice shaking on that podcast. And it felt like someone reached across the dark and said, 'You're not alone. Thank you.'" I read that message 3 times, then folded it into the back of my journal like a letter I'd carry forever. It made me realize something powerful sometimes. Bravery doesn't look like a protest or a podium. Sometimes, bravery is a trembling voice saying, "Here's my story." I started writing my first column that night. The title was simple, "We Begin Again." And I ended it with this question, one I ask you now. What if your mess is the very map someone else needs to find their way home? The invitation arrived in a crisp white envelope, tucked between a stack of business cards and thank you notes on my desk. Embossed in red and charcoal gray was a single line, TEDx Portland. You're invited to share your story. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Me stand on a TEDx stage, in front of hundreds of strangers, wearing headset microphones and floodlights. But there it was in black and white, an invitation to speak at the annual TEDx conference in Portland. The theme that year was reinvention. I suppose that made sense. Reinvention was now the word most attached to my name online. The columnist, the podcast guest, the woman who sold stories sewn into vintage coats. But the thought of standing in front of a real crowd, not just a podcast audience I couldn't see, terrified me. I accepted anyway. The weeks leading up to the event were a blur of preparation, pacing, and practicing in front of mirrors. I wrote, rewrote, and rewrote my speech. I practiced hand gestures. I tried on 5 different jackets. Eventually, I picked one that Avery had chosen, a soft blue with hand-stitched sunflowers on the cuffs. "It looks like hope," she said. On the morning of the talk, Portland felt unusually quiet. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and the auditorium was filled with the smell of coffee, fresh stage paint, and faint nerves. As I waited backstage, I peeked through the curtain, and there he was. Dylan. I hadn't seen him in years. He was seated near the front, elbows on his knees, leaning forward like a man who didn't know how to relax. His salt and pepper hair looked thinner. He hadn't seen me yet, but I saw him, and just for a second, I was 28 again, sitting across from his glass desk, being told I was too emotional, too distracted, not the right fit for leadership. He'd said I was a liability. My palms started to sweat. I considered walking out. What if he smirked? What if he rolled his eyes? What if I faltered? But then I looked at Avery, seated in the second row beside Sandra Ray, the podcast host. Avery gave me a double thumbs up. My breath steadied. The host called my name. The lights dimmed. I stepped onto the stage, and I began. Not with triumph. Not with "look at me now." But with the bathroom floor, I spoke about the breakdowns, the red scarf, the rejection letters, the sleepless nights sewing and crying, the blog post I nearly deleted. I told them about the quiet voice that said "not yet," and the louder voice that said "you can still get up." I told them how healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in teaspoons, folded laundry, handwritten notes, chamomile tea, and one stranger telling you they believe in you. I never once mentioned Dylan, but as I spoke, I saw him shift in his chair, lean back, then lean forward again, hands clasped, and in his eyes, I saw something unexpected. Not arrogance, not dismissal, but something softer. Something like shame or maybe awe. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick and sacred. Then the applause rose like a wave, first a ripple, then a crash. I walked off stage, not triumphant, but free. Backstage, several people hugged me. A few cried. Avery barreled into my arms and whispered, "You were magic." Later that night, the TEDx team posted the talk online. Within hours, it was trending, titled "How I Sewed My Way Out of Silence." It became one of the most shared talks that month. And Dylan, he didn't message me. He didn't approach me. He didn't apologize. But he stood in the back of the auditorium after the crowd had left, and just before the lights dimmed for the next session, he nodded. A small, almost invisible nod. It was enough. I didn't need his apology. Because I had something bigger, I had my voice, and I had learned, truly learned, that forgiveness doesn't always come with an "I'm sorry." Sometimes, forgiveness is what you give yourself when you refuse to be defined by someone else's silence. And success. Success is the loudest peace I've ever known. That evening, I walked home through downtown, shoes in one hand, jacket wrapped tight against the Portland breeze. Lights flickered in storefronts, and I passed by a bookstore where a screen displayed my TEDx thumbnail. Surreal didn't even begin to cover it. Back at the apartment, I found Avery already curled up with popcorn, replaying the video on the television. "You didn't cry," she said. Impressed. I wanted to. I admitted. She smiled. "You didn't need to. You made them cry instead." I laughed. But her words sank in. There was something powerful about being witnessed, about owning your pain without apology, and about showing others they could rise too. The next morning, I received an email from a school counselor in Ohio. She wrote that she had shown my talk to a group of senior girls struggling with self-worth and confidence. They asked if you could be their honorary big sister. She said, I sat there, blinking at the screen, coffee growing cold beside me. Then came another message from a women's shelter in Seattle. They wanted me to come speak. And one more from a publisher. It was like the universe had been waiting for me to say yes to myself. That week, I added a quote to my desk wall. Scribbled in Avery's purple glitter pen. Don't wait for permission. Be the story you needed when you were lost. Forgiveness. Grace. Becoming the version of yourself you once thought impossible. That's what the stage had given me. And I would never again give that power away. The email came with a golden subject line from the desk of Lydia Becker, Opportunity for Luna and Co. At first, I thought it was another feature request or podcast invitation. But as I read the first paragraph, my hands began to shake. Becker and Monroe, one of the largest media conglomerates on the East Coast, wanted to acquire Luna and Co. Sell in COSO. Not just sponsor. Not just collaborate. Acquire. They wanted me to become their global creative director, overseeing a new storytelling division that would take my vision and scale it internationally. Video series, published memoirs, marchandises, global tours. A paycheck I couldn't even wrap my head around. And one catch. I would need to move to New York. I closed the laptop slowly. My studio felt too quiet. The sewing machine in the corner. The old fabric piles. The faint smell of lavender from the tea I'd made earlier, they all suddenly felt temporary. New York. Creative director. Power. Prestige. Permanence. It sounded like everything I had once dreamed of when I was broke and scribbling story ideas in the margins of overdue bills. But then I looked around. At the wall where Avery's drawings were taped beside my speech draft, at the soft sunflower-stitched coat still hanging on the back of my chair, at the printout of Marla's email from Wisconsin, and I felt something catch in my throat. Could I really walk away from all this, that night? I didn't sleep. I walked through the streets of Portland barefoot in memory, if not in body. Past the corner bookstore where I'd once left handmade bookmarks. Past the coffee shop where I met Sandra Ray and first said yes to a podcast. Past the community center where I hosted free storytelling workshops for single moms. This was home. But was I just afraid? Afraid of change, of challenge, Of outgrowing the life I built? Or was I afraid of losing the intimacy I remembered the first time Avery called me mom too? Zero her way of saying she saw me trying. Not perfect. Not fixed. Just trying. In New York, I'd have assistants. Meetings. A team. I'd be Luna. The brand. Not Luna. The woman who once stitched survival into a scarf. I climbed to the rooftop of my building. City lights flickering below like blinking stars. I cried not because I was sad or overwhelmed, but because this time I had the freedom to choose Cleedon. That in itself was a kind of wealth I had never known. I whispered into the wind. What story do I want to live by morning? I had my answer. I emailed Lydia Becker a polite, grateful rejection. I wrote, I built Luna & Co. with my hands. My words. And my wounds. And, for now, its home is here, with the people who saw me become myself again. Maybe one day. But not today. Then I brewed tea. Put on music. And opened a blank page. I began to write not a press release. Not a speech, but a letter to every woman still sitting on her bathroom floor. Waiting for the strength to get up. Because sometimes, turning down the world is the most powerful way to turn toward yourself. Later that afternoon, Avery came home from school. Slinging her backpack on the kitchen stool like she always did, I was sitting by the window. Journal open. Cup of green tea cooling beside me. She looked at me with those wide, knowing eyes. You okay? I got offered something big. I said, like, change, everything big. She squinted. Did you say yes? I said no. She blinked. Why, I smiled. Because it didn't feel like me. Not the real me. The me that sews dreams into old coats. The me that reads your sticky note affirmations like scripture. Avery walked over and wrapped her arms around me. I'm glad. I like this you. So did I. In the days that followed, I received more calls and offers. Some people were confused. Some were shocked. A few even warned me I was throwing away a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like I had chosen soul over scale. And it reminded me of something I once read in a dog-eared library book. Success is not about how far you go, but how true you stay. So I stayed. I started writing a new series this one, dedicated to resilience in small moments, the single father who learned to braid his daughter's hair, the immigrant baker who gave away bread to jobless neighbors, the teenager who turned her diary into poetry, slams. Luna & Co. wasn't just a brand anymore. It had become a heartbeat, a quiet rebellion against the noise of perfection. And I was its keeper. Because home isn't always a place. Sometimes, it's a rhythm you create when your truth and your choice finally dance together. On the following Sunday, I hosted a community circle at the local library. Just 10 folding chairs, a thermos of chai, and a small whiteboard with one question written in purple marker. What do you believe now that you didn't before? A retired nurse said. That it's okay to rest. A young man whispered. That I'm allowed to be soft. Avery said. That love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. And I answered last. That I don't need to be famous to be free. The room was silent. Then, slowly, smiles broke across faces. It wasn't applause. It wasn't viral. But it was sacred. Later that night, I stitched those words into a coat liner. Just like I used to. Only this time, the coat was mine. A reminder that I chose this, that I am this. Not an empire, not a logo, but a woman who came back to life and decided to stay right where she bloomed, The gallery was nothing fancy, just a sunlit brick loft above a bakery in downtown Portland. It smelled like fresh sourdough and vanilla candles. But to me, it felt like a cathedral. The sign outside read, "Threads of Becoming, a storytelling installation by Luna." Inside, old wooden coat racks held my hand-stitched jackets. Each one hung like a sacred artifact. Every tag carried a small paragraph, a piece of someone's story woven into every thread. There was the jacket I made during my lowest winter, the one I wore when I met Avery. Another that belonged to a woman who had escaped a violent relationship and stitched her healing into the lining with me. Guests walked slowly, gently, as if afraid to break the silence that blanketed the room. They touched the fabrics like they were feeling skin. Memory. Time. In the center of the room, I had placed a circular mirror surrounded by loose spools of thread. Above it, a sign read, "Who are you becoming?" I wasn't sure who had come up with that line, maybe Avery, but it was perfect. Speaking of Avery, she stood up front, clutching a folded piece of paper in her hand. Cheeks flushed but eyes steady. People quieted as she began to speak. "This was written by me, for Luna," she said. "But really, it's for anyone who ever thought they were too broken to begin again." Her voice trembled, but her words were fire. She told me once that every stitch was a way to remember, and every tear in the fabric meant you had survived something. That pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you worthy. That even when you feel small, you can still hold space for someone else. Avery paused, glanced at me, and smiled. I used to think healing meant forgetting. Now I know it means becoming. Applause filled the room. But it wasn't the kind that echoed off walls. It was the kind that echoed off hearts. I stayed at the back, leaning against the brick wall, watching, feeling. For once, I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to be the face or the brand or the storyteller. Because the stories were speaking for themselves. Because the room was full of them. A woman in her 70s wiped her eyes while holding the sunflower coat, the same one I almost sold for rent 2 years ago. A teenage boy held his mother's hand while reading the note inside Avery's armor, a jacket she designed for our podcast giveaway. A father in a wheelchair asked to take home a photo of the mirror. He said his daughter needed to see it. That night, after the lights dimmed and the room emptied, I stood alone amid the coats and candlelight. I thought about all the things I had once begged for validation, rescue, redemption, and how none of them came the way I expected. Instead, they came wrapped in struggle, stitched with silence, dyed with grief. And somehow, that made them more real, more mine. I walked up to the center mirror, the one with the question, "Who are you becoming?" and I stared. For a while, I just looked at the woman staring back, hair a little messy, smile a little crooked, but eyes clear, grounded, whole. I whispered, "I'm becoming someone I trust." And that was everything. As I gathered the extra threads and turned off the lights one by one, I thought back to the very first coat I ever made in that tiny apartment. With a thrift store sewing machine and shaky hands. I had no idea back then what I was stitching into that fabric. I thought I was just trying to survive. But maybe I was weaving a map, one I could follow out of the dark. A week later, I received a letter, handwritten. No return address. Just one line, "Thank you for reminding me I'm allowed to take up space in this world." I pressed it to my chest and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood. It was never about the coats, or the speeches, or the platform. It was about the invitation to come home to yourself, to choose gentleness over shame, to remember that becoming isn't a destination, it's a daily decision, 2 months after the exhibition. A high school in upstate New York asked if I could speak to their students. Not at a fancy auditorium, just in the art room. Surrounded by paint-stained tables and half-done canvases, I said yes. When I arrived, a girl named Jamie showed me a denim jacket she'd patched together with pieces from her late grandmother's dresses. "I didn't know this could be art," she whispered. "It's not just art." I said, "It's memory. And memory is magic." After I spoke, one of the boys came up to me, eyes filled with tears. I think I'm ready to talk about my mom. These weren't just kids. They were becoming, and I realized, so was I. Not every life is meant to be loud. Some are meant to be deeply lived. So if you're standing on the edge of your story, afraid to begin, I hope you know this: you don't need permission. You don't need perfection. You only need the courage to show up threadbare and honest, because maybe, just maybe, the life that's been calling you has been yours all along, waiting for you to answer.